Across the vast expanse of the galaxy, countless species flourished, each more advanced than the last, while humans were relegated to the lowest rung of the galactic hierarchy, seen as nothing more than primitive creatures, no better than pets or livestock. They were a curiosity to the alien races, whose powers and intellects far surpassed anything humanity had ever conceived in their wildest dreams. To the species that roamed the stars, humans were a joke, a species that could barely understand their place in the universe. And to the Zorothi, an ancient race of psychics who ruled the edges of known space, humans were little more than playthings waiting to be collected. The Zorothi had always believed in their superiority. They had conquered planets and enslaved species. For millennia, their minds, capable of bending weaker beings to their will, their telekinetic abilities, rendering entire fleets powerless in the blink of an eye. They had never encountered a species so backward and defiant as humans, yet they didn't think it would be much of a challenge to bring Earth into their fold. They'd been watching from the shadows for some time now, amused by how humans had advanced in their own way through sheer tenacity. They found it charming how humans had learned to adapt and survive, but never truly thrive, how they clung to their petty notions of family love and companionship, as if those things had any value in a universe governed by power and intellect. When the Zorothi finally decided to act, they sent a fleet to Earth with a clear and simple mission: to capture humanity, to bring them to their great citadel, and display them to the universe as the ultimate proof of their dominion over lesser species. They landed on Earth in quiet grandeur, their ships descending like dark omens over cities and fields that looked so fragile from above. They began rounding up humans with surgical precision, isolating them from their pets and families for study and observation. They saw it as a simple experiment. No one had to be hurt in the process, of course. Just gather the humans, put them in pens where they could be easily managed and controlled, and then wait for the fun to begin. At first, the humans were confused when they were taken. Many of them thought it was some kind of new government operation, or perhaps an alien hoax, something that would blow over in time. But as the days went by, it became clear this was no joke, and it wasn't going to end anytime soon. Some resisted, of course. A few brave souls tried to escape, but most were captured within hours, their homes ransacked, their loved ones lost in the chaos. But what truly fascinated the Zorothi was the strange attachment humans had to their pets. Most species viewed animals as little more than tools for work or food, but humans had a bond that ran far deeper than anyone could have predicted. Their pets were not just companions, they were family. They were the embodiment of trust and loyalty. And it baffled the Zorothi to no end. They watched in silence as humans begged and cried for their pets to be returned to them. Some even tried to break free, to steal back the animals that had been taken, and in the Zorothi's eyes, it was a weakness, one that would be broken like all others. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't fathom, was that this bond between human and pet was not simply a sign of weakness. It was the root of something far darker and far stronger, something that no psychic power or telekinetic ability could hope to control, something that would soon reveal itself in ways the Zorothi never could have predicted. The Zorothi had never seen anything like it. They had expected humans to break quickly, to bend under the weight of their psychic powers, to fall in line with their every command. But the humans resisted in ways they had not anticipated, their spirits unyielding even in the face of the cold and overwhelming presence of their captors. Jack was one of those humans, standing in the center of a pen that was nothing more than a small metal cage, surrounded by alien observers, his body tense, his eyes never wavering from the towering forms of the Zorothi. The commander of the operation, a being named Tallow, stood across from him, their telekinetic aura shimmering like an electric storm, ready to strike. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained unchanged. For years, he had fought battles that had scared his soul, but none of those wounds compared to the cold isolation he now faced without Rex, his dog, his best friend, his constant companion. He had been stripped of his weapon, his armor, his past, but the one thing they couldn't take from him was his mind and his bond with Rex. Tallow smiled with the arrogance of 1,000 victories over lesser beings. He had seen this before: the defiance, the resistance, but it was always fleeting. In the end, the same broken expressions, as the humans realized they had no escape. But Tallow hadn't anticipated how different Jack was. Jack was a man who had fought in wars where the odds were stacked against him every single time, and somehow always managed to pull through. He had learned the value of keeping his emotions in check, of not giving in to fear or despair, and though the Zarathi were powerful, they were also predictable. Jack had always hated predictability. It was too easy to exploit. Tallow raised his hand, and the air around Jack seemed to hum with energy. A crackling sound like static electricity filled the space as the alien commander prepared to force Jack to his knees. With nothing more than his mind, he could feel the pressure building, a tugging force inside his head, pulling at his thoughts. But Jack resisted. His mind was strong, though not impervious, and he could feel the alien's power trying to crack through his mental defenses. Tallow's eyes narrowed as he concentrated harder, pushing more force into the connection, but Jack stood tall, refusing to let the alien see him falter. Suddenly the pressure broke like a dam shattering with a single thought. Jack could feel it. His mind surged in defiance. He wasn't going to bow to anyone, least of all a species that thought it could break a human. With a thought, he focused his anger not on the alien's power, but on the bond that had kept him alive for so long. His loyalty to Rex surged within him. He imagined his dog's face, his sharp eyes and strong body, his unwavering companionship. That bond was stronger than any psychic influence. No power could touch it. Tallow's face twisted in confusion as he sensed something was off, something he hadn't prepared for. Jack wasn't bending to his will, but the more Tallow pushed, the more Jack fought back, with a force that was primal, a raw surge of human will that the alien had never encountered before, not in any species he had ever subjugated before. The air crackled as the telekinetic grip began to falter. For the briefest of moments, Jack's body shook, but his resolve held firm. Tallow released the grip, his hand dropping slightly as he glared at Jack, who stood his ground. The alien's confusion was palpable, and Jack took a single step forward, his voice cold but steady. "You don't know what you've done. You have no idea what you're about to face." It was a moment that would forever shift the course of this conflict. Something deep in Jack had awoken, something far more dangerous than the aliens had realized. The tension in the air was palpable as the Zarathi commander Tallow stood still, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had expected to break Jack, to see him crumble under the weight of his psychic influence, but instead Jack had fought back with a strength that should not have been possible. Tallow's pride was wounded, and in that moment he made a decision that would change everything for both him and the humans. He turned to his subordinates, who had been quietly observing the exchange, their faces betraying both curiosity and concern. "Prepare the test," he commanded, his voice cold but filled with a simmering anger. "Let's see how much resolve this human truly has." The test was simple, at least it seemed so in the beginning. The humans would be forced to choose between loyalty to their captors or loyalty to their pets. The Zarathi had no understanding of the bond between human and animal. They had never known the kind of attachment the humans shared with their pets to them. It was just another primitive instinct, one that could be broken like all others. But they underestimated how much this instinct meant to the humans, how much it fueled their will to fight. Jack was led out of the cage by two guards, one on either side, their grip tight and unforgiving. As they pulled him forward, Jack's heart raced, but he didn't show it. He kept his gaze fixed ahead, his mind working quickly to process his options and the situation. He knew what was coming. He could feel it in his bones. Rex was somewhere nearby, and the Zarathi had made no secret of their plan to test his loyalty by threatening the only living thing he had left in the world. They led him to an open area where several other humans were being held, each of them standing in a line as a group of aliens watched from the shadows, their cold eyes glowing faintly. Jack could hear the soft whimpers of dogs being kept in cages nearby, but he couldn't see Rex, yet his anxiety grew with each step. He took his mind racing, wondering if his dog was being tortured, if Rex was suffering in silence, somewhere just out of sight. Tallow stood before him, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. "You've already shown us that you're not like the others, human," Tallow said, his voice smooth and condescending. "But let's see how far your defiance goes when we introduce a real test of loyalty." Jack's heart stopped as the sound of chains clinking echoed through the area. A door opened to his left, and there in the center of the room stood Rex, his large body straining against the leash that held him in place. The dog's eyes locked onto Jack's face, and for a moment everything else faded into the background. Rex's presence was all that mattered in that instant. The Zarathi laughed, their cold amusement ringing in the air as they pulled Rex toward Jack, the dog growling softly, his muscles tense, his body ready to spring into action if given the command. But Jack knew better than to hope for a simple rescue. This wasn't a fight he could win with brute strength. This was a battle of will, a test of what mattered most in a world that saw no value in love or loyalty. Talos spoke again, this time his voice colder. "You will choose human," he said. "Choose to obey us, or choose to watch your dog suffer." Jack looked down at Rex, whose eyes never left his face. The loyalty in those eyes spoke volumes. It was clear that Rex had no fear. He trusted Jack with his life, just as Jack had always trusted him in every battle they had fought together, in every war. Jack had never known a loyalty as pure as the one he shared with Rex. And in that moment, Jack knew exactly what he had to do. The room seemed to shrink around Jack as Rex was brought closer. The dog's growl was low, but full of warning. His eyes locked onto Jack's with a mixture of trust and fury. It was as if they were the only two beings left in the universe. Everything else had faded away. Talos stood before them, his smug expression never wavering as he let the silence stretch out for a moment before speaking again. "You see, human," he began, his voice dripping with mockery. "This is the ultimate test of your kind's pathetic weakness. Your love for this creature has led you here. Now it will be your undoing." Jack could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, the air thick with the weight of the decision before him. The Zarathi were toying with him, but they didn't understand what he was feeling, what Rex was feeling. There was no choice in his mind. Jack knew what he had to do, no matter what the consequences. No matter how the aliens tried to manipulate him, there was one line they had crossed that could never be undone. Talo raised his hand, a signal to his guards, and in an instant one of them stepped forward holding a sharp metal rod designed to shock and incapacitate Rex. The dog barked once in warning, but it was clear the aliens had no intention of letting the creature live peacefully. Jack could feel the heat rising in his chest, the anger building like a storm ready to explode. "If you touch him," Jack's voice was steady but full of fury, "I swear to you, you will regret it." The alien commander's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smile as he took a step back. "Very well," he said, as if Jack's words were nothing more than an amusing challenge. "We will see how far your loyalty goes." He gestured to the guard to move forward. Jack's body tensed, the world narrowing to a single moment, one that would change everything for him and Rex forever. It wasn't just about survival. It wasn't about winning. This was something deeper, something more primal than any battle he had ever fought before. This was about defiance. This was about the will to protect what mattered most. Jack's hands clenched into fists as he took a single step forward toward Rex, his gaze locked onto the dogs. Talo watched him with growing amusement, unaware of the storm that was about to break. His confidence in his victory was complete. He believed the human would crumble under the pressure, that he would choose to save himself over the dog. But what he didn't know was that Jack was a soldier, a man who had seen the darkest corners of war, who had survived on instinct and grit in situations far worse than this. He had been pushed to the edge more times than he could count, and yet he had never backed down. He had never let fear rule him. He had never let anything stand in the way of what he believed was right. As the guard moved closer, Jack's legs moved with a purpose, his body moving as if on instinct, not allowing any room for hesitation. The moment the guard reached out for Rex, Jack surged forward. With the speed of a predator, the air around him seemed to hum as he ducked under the guard's reach and grabbed hold of the chain holding Rex back. With one powerful yank, he freed the dog from its restraints. Rex reacted instantly, his massive form springing into motion as he lunged forward toward the alien guard, his teeth flashing in the light. The guard barely had time to react as Rex's jaws clamped down on the alien's arm with terrifying precision. The guard screamed in pain as he struggled to free himself, but Rex wasn't letting go. The dog's loyalty was a weapon as sharp as any blade, and in that moment it was clear to everyone in the room that they had misjudged the strength of this bond. Talo's eyes widened with shock as he watched his guard flounder helplessly. The alien commander's pride Shattered in an instant, he had believed he understood the limits of humans, but he had been wrong. Jack and Rex were not just pets and masters. They were partners in a way that no alien could comprehend. The bond they shared was not something to be broken or controlled. It was something that could not be defeated. Jack stepped back and drew Rex close, his voice steady but full of fury as he looked directly at Tallow. "You don't get it," he said, his eyes never leaving the alien's face. "This is more than a pet. This is family, and you'll never break us." And for the first time since the Zarathi had arrived on Earth, Tallow felt something he had never expected: fear. Tallow's face twisted into a mask of pure rage, his hands trembling with the fury of having been so thoroughly humiliated by a human and his dog. What had started as a calculated test of obedience had turned into something far more dangerous, far more uncontrollable. And in that moment, the commander knew that this would not be the end. This was only the beginning. Jack stood firm, his arm around Rex, the dog's growl still low but steady, as if sensing the changing tides. The Zarothi's pride had been shattered, but they were not finished yet. Tallow's eyes burned with a cold resolve as he turned toward his subordinates. "Prepare the next phase," he barked, his voice thick with the promise of retribution. "Let us see how much more this human can endure." The other Zarathi stepped forward, each one unsure of what had just transpired. They had witnessed a scene they had never expected. The primal strength of the human and the loyalty of the dog had shattered the illusion of superiority they had built around themselves. Jack felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he didn't flinch. Rex's warm body against his side was a reminder that he was not alone. They were in this together, and that made all the difference. The room fell into a tense silence as the Zarathi moved to implement their next move. They had not anticipated this resistance from the humans, and now they needed to take a different approach. They would force Jack and Rex into submission, not through telepathic manipulation, but through fear. The commander's mind whirred with ideas, and then he spoke again, his voice now edged with venom. "We will break you," Tallow declared. "We will break your spirit and your loyalty. We will show you the true power of the Zarathi." Jack's jaw clenched, his mind working to process what was happening, but his body remained steady, his gaze unwavering. Rex's loyalty was not something to be toyed with, not by anyone. No matter how powerful they were, Jack would protect him with everything he had. If the Zarathi thought they could intimidate him, they were gravely mistaken. The challenge had been made, and Jack would meet it head-on. A loud mechanical whir rang through the room as the walls seemed to shift, the lights dimming as new cages slid into view, each one occupied by a different creature, each one bound and restrained. The new arrivals were animals of all kinds, some familiar to Earth, some from distant planets, creatures with sharp claws and teeth, strange beasts that had been captured and enslaved by the Zarathi in their endless hunt for dominance. The sight made Jack's blood run cold. He knew what Tallow was trying to do. He was using the other animals as leverage. He was showing Jack what he could do to those who defied him. The message was clear: surrender and submit, or watch everything you love perish. Jack's pulse quickened as he looked around at the cages, his eyes searching for any sign of Rex's safety. But it was hard to focus with so much chaos unfolding around him. The Zarathi had set the stage for their next move, and they were not going to make it easy. The threat was simple and effective. Jack knew that if he gave in even for a moment, it could mean the end for Rex and every other living creature in that room. And that's when it happened. A figure moved from the shadows, a creature whose presence sent a ripple of fear through the room. It was tall and imposing, covered in armored plating and thick scales, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. It was an executioner, a being designed to deal with those who resisted the Zarathis. Will it was sent to break Jack's resolve. Tallow's voice echoed through the silence again. "This is your final choice, human. You will obey, or you will face the consequences." Jack's heart pounded, but his grip on Rex tightened. He was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something far greater. This was a fight for freedom, for dignity, and for everything humanity had ever stood for. "Come on, then." Jack's voice rang out steady and full of defiance. "You think you can break me, but you don't know what I'm capable of." The creature stepped forward, its massive footfalls shaking the ground beneath them, and Jack knew in that moment that the real battle had only just begun. The creature moved with unnerving speed, its hulking form casting a shadow over Jack and Rex. The air seemed to grow heavier as it advanced, every step sending tremors through the ground. Jack could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. But he refused to let fear take hold. He had faced enemies far more terrifying than this thing. He had stared down death and walked away, but now it was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about protecting Rex and showing the Zerothi the true strength of humanity. Talos stood back watching with a twisted sense of satisfaction as the executioner moved closer to Jack, his eyes glowing with anticipation. The other Zerothi watched silently, their pride still bruised, but now replaced with a cold calculation. They knew they had no choice but to put down this human who had defied them in front of so many of their kind. The dog was an afterthought in their eyes, an animal that could be crushed easily. Once the human was broken, they believed it was all just a matter of time. But Jack wasn't thinking about time or the aliens' plans. He was thinking about the animal at his side, the one creature in this universe who had never betrayed him, the one being who had stayed by his side. No matter what, Jack would die before he let anyone hurt Rex, not while he had breath in his body. The creature loomed over them now, its massive claws scraping the floor as it raised a fist the size of a boulder toward Jack's head. The force behind it could have caved in a tank, and Jack knew it would do the same to him if it landed, but there was no hesitation in his movement. With a growl of fury, Jack dove to the side, pulling Rex with him, his body rolling across the floor, and just as the executioner's fist slammed into the ground where he had been standing, the earth cracked and splintered under the weight of the blow. Rex barked and leaped to his feet, his muscles rippling as he sprang toward the creature. With a snarl, his teeth bared, Jack barely had time to push himself to his feet before the dog collided with the executioner's leg, sinking his teeth into the armored plating. The creature roared in pain, but it was clear that the dog's bite wasn't going to be enough. The creature reached down, grabbing Rex by the scruff of his neck and lifting him off the ground. Jack's heart stopped as he watched the creature dangle Rex in its grasp, the dog kicking and growling, but helpless against the overwhelming strength of the executioner. The creature's eyes gleamed with malice as it raised Rex higher, ready to crush him like an insect. Jack could feel his chest tighten, the pressure of helplessness threatening to overwhelm him. But there was no time for that. He couldn't think about the odds or the pain. He only had one choice left. His eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could turn the tide. His gaze landed on the metal rods that lined the walls, weapons left behind by the Zerothi soldiers. Jack didn't waste a second. He grabbed one of the rods and with all his strength hurled it at the executioner's chest. The projectile slammed into the creature's armor with a deafening clang. But it wasn't the hit that mattered, it was the distraction, the split second of confusion that Jack needed. The creature turned just enough for Jack to launch himself forward, his body a blur of motion. As he dove toward the executioner's legs, he slammed into the creature with everything he had, and for a moment it was as if time itself slowed. The force of Jack's body hitting the creature's legs was enough to knock it off balance, just for a fraction of a second, but that was all Jack needed. Rex hit the ground with a thud, but he wasn't out of the fight yet. In a flash, he was back on his feet, charging toward the creature's exposed side, his teeth sinking into the weak spot where the armor met the creature's flesh. The executioner howled in pain and dropped Rex. The creature spun around to face Jack, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted, and the dog's bite had made all the difference. The Zerothi watched in stunned silence as Jack and Rex fought as one unit, pushing the creature back step by step, forcing it to retreat. Talos' eyes burned with fury, but there was nothing he could do to stop them now. The fight had gone beyond his control. The humans had proven that they could not be broken so easily, and for the first time since the Zerothi had begun their campaign on Earth, Talos realized that his conquest was not a matter of conquering humans, it was about surviving them. The executioner staggered back, its massive form reeling from the relentless assault by Jack and Rex. The creature's growls were more frustration now than rage. It had underestimated the human and his dog. Both of them were relentless forces of nature. Jack's mind raced even as he moved with precision, his movements sharp, his body already sore from the earlier confrontation. But he pushed through it. The adrenaline in his veins was the only thing keeping him going. Rex was still at his side. His teeth bared, his body bristling with energy. He was a weapon, a force of loyalty that the Zarathi had never prepared for. Talos' face twisted into an expression of disbelief. He had seen countless beings fall before the might of his people, but these two humans were different. They were unpredictable, and the more he watched, the more he realized they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to make a point, and that point was clear. They would not be broken, they would not be controlled, and they would not be enslaved, not by the Zarathi or anyone else. The other Zarathi soldiers in the room exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen one of their executioners falter this way, but there was no denying it. Jack and Rex were gaining ground. The creature was struggling to keep up with their speed and agility. Rex's teeth had torn through the creature's armor in several places, leaving deep gashes where the metal had been sheared away. Jack had found the perfect rhythm, now moving like a predator, circling his prey. The executioner's every move was predictable. Jack was learning quickly how to read the creature, how to stay one step ahead. But the moment was fleeting, and Talo knew it. If he let this continue, the humans might just turn the tables entirely. They couldn't let that happen, no, not after everything they had invested in this mission. The Zarathi's pride and reputation were at stake, and Talo would not let a human and his dog be the cause of their downfall. Talo raised his hand, his eyes glowing with malice, and the air around the room shifted suddenly. Jack felt the temperature drop as a cold wind swept through the chamber. The shadows seemed to deepen, and the psychic pressure became unbearable. It was as though the very air was pressing down on him, squeezing the life out of him. Jack's breath caught in his throat, and for the first time in the fight, he felt his strength waver. Rex growled low, his hackles raised as he stood between Jack and the source of the pressure. Talo's telekinetic grip was like a vise around their bodies, trying to force them to their knees. But Jack couldn't afford to fall, not now, not when they were this close. Rex barked and lunged forward, his body a blur of motion as he attempted to break through the invisible barrier. But Talo's power was too strong. The dog was pushed back with a psychic force that sent him crashing to the floor. Jack staggered back, as well, his head pounding with the force of the alien's power. But he wasn't done yet. There was a fire inside him that couldn't be extinguished, a resolve forged in battle that would not be broken. The pain was unbearable, but Jack gritted his teeth and pushed through it. He had to keep going. He had to protect Rex. He had to protect Earth. He clenched his fists and focused every ounce of his will on the one thing that mattered: Rex's safety, the one thing Talo couldn't take from him. "You think you can break us?" Jack rasped, his voice hoarse from the pressure. "But you don't know what we're made of." Talo's smile twisted into something darker as he pressed harder, but it was in that moment that Jack felt it, the bond between him and Rex, the unbreakable connection that had carried them through countless dangers. It surged in his chest, and he realized that he wasn't alone. He never had been. Rex was his strength, his reason to keep going, and that was more powerful than any psychic force. With a sudden burst of determination, Jack pushed through the pain, his body surging forward, as if fueled by some otherworldly force. He wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was fighting for something bigger, for the future, for the freedom of his people and his planet. The weight of the Zarathi's pressure broke away like sand slipping through his fingers, and in that moment, Jack lunged toward Talo, his movements fast and furious. Rex was right behind him, a blur of fur and fury, ready to tear through any obstacle that stood between them and victory. Talo's eyes widened in realization, but it was too late. The human and his dog had just made their final move. Talo's eyes widened in disbelief as Jack and Rex charged forward together. The human's body was a blur of determination, his fists flying toward the alien commander with all the force of someone who had nothing left to lose. And Rex was right there beside him, his jaws snapping at the air like a beast unleashed. There was no hesitation, no fear, just pure drive pushing them both forward, their bond stronger than ever before. Talo reacted instinctively, raising his hand in an attempt to push Jack back with his psychic power. But it was clear that something had shifted in the human. The pressure that had once seemed suffocating now seemed to have little effect. Jack's movements were fueled by something beyond pain, beyond logic. He was no longer thinking with his mind. He was thinking with his heart and his soul, and it made him unstoppable. The psychic grip faltered for just a split second, and that was all Jack needed. In that instant his fist connected with Talos' face. With a sickening crack, the alien commander staggered back, stunned by the sheer force of the blow. Jack didn't waste any time. He followed up with a brutal punch to Talos' midsection, riving the air out of the commander's lungs. The force of it was enough to send Talos to the ground with a loud thud. Rex stood at Jack's side, his growl deep and menacing as the executioner advanced once more, but the creature hesitated. It had seen its master fall, and now there was doubt in its eyes, doubt that had never been there before. Jack's chest heaved as he took a step forward, his eyes locked onto Talos' prone form. The Zerothi commander was not completely down, but he was winded and vulnerable for the first time since the battle had begun. Jack felt the shift in power. He had gained the upper hand. Talos groaned as he pushed himself to his knees, his eyes dark with fury and disbelief. You think you've won," he gasped between breaths, his voice filled with venom. "You think you can beat us with brute strength and loyalty." Jack stood tall in front of him, his voice calm but deadly. "I don't need to beat you with strength," he said, his eyes never leaving Talos. "I just need to show you that you can't break us. No matter what you do, no matter how many times you try to push us down, we will get back up." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Talos' eyes flickered with rage as he tried to regain control of the situation, his body trembling with the effort to stand. His pride was shattered. The humans had taken everything from him, and he couldn't understand it. He couldn't comprehend how something so simple as loyalty could destroy the plan he had so carefully crafted for so long. Behind them, the other Zerothi soldiers began to stir, their hesitation growing as they witnessed the turn of events. They had never expected to see a human standing over their commander, the dog at his side, ready to fight to the death if necessary. It was a symbol of resistance and defiance that shook them to their core. These weren't just pets, these were warriors, and the Zerothi had underestimated them from the very beginning. Jack felt the shift in the room as the air grew thick with tension. The other aliens watched them now with wary eyes. They had seen the true power of humanity, and it was something they had never anticipated. The will to protect those they loved was something that no amount of strength or technology could ever defeat. Talos rose shakily to his feet, his eyes now burning with the cold fire of desperation. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he hissed as his body began to glow with an ominous energy, his psychic power flaring. Once more the air crackled with the intensity of it. Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshaken. "No, you're the one who doesn't get it," he said, his voice steady and full of finality. "You don't understand what happens when you threaten a human's family." With that, Jack and Rex moved in sync, their bond unbreakable as they charged toward Talos and the remaining Zerothi warriors with a ferocity born of love, loyalty, and the will to fight for their future. Talos' body crackled with energy, his fists glowing with the power of his psychic abilities as he tried to brace himself for the incoming assault. But Jack and Rex were faster than he could react. The human moved with a deadly precision, his body a blur as he closed the distance between them, while Rex darted to his side, a shadow of muscle and fury. The dog's eyes locked onto the alien commander with the same intensity that Jack carried in his heart. There was no room for doubt, no room for fear. They were fighting for their lives, and they would not lose. Talos' psychic power surged, but it was no match for the force that Jack and Rex brought together, their movements synchronized like a single unit driven by a singular goal, to take down the one who had dared to threaten everything they loved. Jack was not thinking about winning or losing anymore. He was thinking about sending a message that the Zerothi could never forget, that humanity was not weak, that they would never bow to invaders. The air hummed with the tension of the battle as Talos unleashed a burst of psychic energy at the duo, trying to knock them back. But Jack dove to the side, his reflexes honed from years of training and battle. Rex was right behind him, leaping toward Talos' side. With a guttural growl, the dog's teeth found their mark. Once more, this time sinking into the weak spot in the commander's armor, the creature howled in pain. But before it could react, Jack was already there, his foot slamming into Talos' chest with a brutal kick that sent the commander crashing to the ground. For a moment the room fell silent, the echoes of the battle fading into the stillness. Talos' body trembled on the floor, his breath ragged, his once imposing presence now reduced to nothing more than the pitiful form of a beaten enemy. His psychic power was spent, he had nothing left to give. Jack stood over him, his body bruised and battered but unbroken, his gaze hard as steel. "You thought you could destroy us," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "You thought you could take what mattered most to us, but you've learned the hard way that we don't give up, not for anything or anyone." Talos' eyes glowed with a sickly light as he tried to push himself up, but Jack's voice cut through the air like a blade. "It's over," he said, and Rex growled in agreement, his stance firm and unyielding beside him. The other Zerothi soldiers had stopped moving, their weapons lowered, their eyes filled with uncertainty and fear. They had watched as their commander was brought down by a human and a dog, and in that moment they realized they were no different from the creatures they had enslaved. They were just as fragile, just as vulnerable. They had come to Earth thinking they would crush humanity, but instead they had awakened something they could not understand. One by one, the Zerothi soldiers looked at each other, their wills crumbling under the weight of their failure. They had underestimated the humans, and their mistake was now clear. Jack and Rex were not just survivors, they were warriors who would fight for each other, and for everything they held dear, and no alien force, no matter how powerful, could ever take that away. Talos' eyes flickered with fear as he realized that his reign of terror had come to an end. His vision of domination over Earth was shattered by the resilience of a human and his dog. You will regret this," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped back and looked to Rex, who stood tall and proud beside him. The dog's eyes were full of loyalty and unspoken understanding. "Not today," Jack said, and with one final glance at Talo and the fallen soldiers, he turned and began to walk toward the exit, his heart filled with relief and pride for what they had accomplished. Rex followed at his side, never leaving his post as the two of them walked away from the battle that had forever changed the fate of Earth. Outside the chambers, the sun had begun to rise, the first light of day casting a golden hue over the battlefield. But it wasn't the sun that mattered now. It was the simple truth that humanity had won not through strength alone, but through the power of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. And as the two of them walked into the dawn together, they knew the war wasn't over yet, but whatever came next, they would face it together.